Robert Hooke. He published his theory of elasticity in 1660. His theory of elasticity, otherwise known as Hooke's law, stated that when a force is applied to an object, the object develops a stress. Once the force is taken away from the object will return back to its original state or its original position. His theory of elasticity is widely used today in really tall buildings, skyscrapers and such, when talking about wind, how wind affects really tall structures. And lastly, we have Isaac Newton. He published this book right here, which is Latin for mathematical principles of natural philosophy. In this book, he had his 3 laws of motion, or he defined his 3 laws of motion. These 3 laws of motion gave engineers a wider understanding of the physics of the world. These 3 laws of motion allow scientists to actually compute a state called equilibrium. Equilibrium basically means that all forces acting upon an object they cancel each other out. So for example, a book laying on top of a table is in a state of equilibrium because the gravity pushing down on the book is matched by the table pushing up on the book, and no other forces are acting on this book. So the book is in a state of equilibrium. It's the goal of an engineer to get a building to maintain a state of equilibrium. It's the primary job of an engineer to balance out durability with the budget. They need to make sure that a building is strong enough to handle the people inside the building as well as Mother Nature, so to speak. But they also need to make sure that they stay within their budget. That's the biggest problem. If engineers didn't have a budget at all, no buildings would collapse in earthquakes because they would be able to use every expense, every tool available to them to make buildings basically indestructible. But the sad truth is that there isn't enough funding to do that for every building. So you must build important buildings such as hospitals, government buildings, police stations, more durable. Those are the buildings with the larger budget. Civilian buildings are not so low. Once the building is determined, what kind of building you're building, such as a hospital, or let's just say a civilian building, the engineer needs to decide what he's going to put inside of the building to make it durable and strong. The building needs to be strong and it needs to be stiff, but it also needs to have something called elastic deformation capability. That goes back to Hooke's law theory of elasticity. Now these two here might sound like a bit of a contradiction. It needs to be stiff, but it needs to be elastic at the same time. My example for that would be like a bow and arrow. When you have a bow, you need the bow to be steady, you need it to be strong. But when you pull on the arrow, the bow needs to bend and flex. When you let go of the arrow, the bow returns back to its original position, its original state. That's the same principle for a building. I'll go over a little bit of the innovations of today and how we as a society today have improved our buildings. The first one is base isolation. Base isolation is exactly what it sounds like. It means that the foundation of a building is independent of the Earth's surface itself, which was mind-boggling for me. Basically, what it does is they build the building on top of struts, bearings. They're called different things, but whenever the Earth moves, instead of the base of the building being jolted out from underneath the top of the building, causing the building to sway, the building itself remains largely uniform and moves individually of the Earth. So the Earth underneath the building could be moving all over the place, the building on top to stay widened still. This one is probably my favorite. It is a tuned mass damper is what it's commonly referred to as. It's basically a really big counterweight. And when a building is in a state of rest, the counterweight will move with the building altogether. But if the building starts to sway and begins to sway a little bit out of its comfort zone, so to speak, the tuned mass damper will activate. Basically what it does is it moves in a contrary motion to the building itself. So if the building is swinging left, the tuned mass damper will swing to the right to sort of counteract the movement of the building, try to get it back to a state of regulation or equilibrium. This is kind of just a little thing showing what it does. As the building is moving this way, the tuned mass damper is moving the opposite way. As soon as the tuned mass damper gets the building back to staying still, the tuned mass damper will stop moving and become one with the building once again. Now, there's sort of a misconception on why earthquakes demolish buildings. I didn't even know why it truly happened, but there's one main reason that earthquakes demolish buildings with. Resonance. Every object in the world has a natural resonance frequency. In the range of a human hearing, it's referred to as pitch. So, for example, wine glasses, when you hit a wine glass and it rings and pretty notes, that's the pitch, that's its natural resonance frequency. But there are so many more frequencies that the human ear cannot detect. Earthquakes, depending on the magnitude of an earthquake, will resonate at key frequencies. If an earthquake can match the frequency, the natural frequency of a building, the building will amplify the vibrations of the earthquake and shake itself to pieces. It will fall apart where buildings standing next to it will be untouched or completely undamaged. This is an example. This is an earthquake in Mexico City in 1985. It was a magnitude 8.1 earthquake, and it only demolished buildings between 6 and 15 stories. No other buildings were damaged besides cosmetic things like windows. So as you can see here, these three buildings here are completely demolished and fell in on themselves, whereas these buildings around them are completely untouched, undamaged. There was no structural damage recorded in any of the larger or smaller buildings during the earthquake. Naturally, you would think that building a building with an uncommon resonance frequency would be the simple solution. Sort of build a building that wouldn't share a resonance frequency that would be commonly found in an earthquake, but this doesn't always work. Even if it doesn't have to be exact. If the earthquake can get within a certain range of the frequency, the building isn't still at a high risk. So what engineers do today, as long as it's within their budget, they will combine a couple of the things that I talked with, along with other things that I haven't mentioned, in the building. They never just choose one. It's always a handful of innovations that they can throw in a building, as many as they can, while staying within the budget. Why I chose this project? I chose this project because I've always sort of decided that I wanted to be a civil engineer or a structural engineer. It's what interested me the most. But I never knew officially how this profession as a whole affected society, affected us as people in our everyday life. So I wanted to sort of get an understanding of this to reinforce my decision of career choice, basically. So this is my presentation for you guys. Are there any questions? Yeah.
I have a Michael on the counterweight of the mass.
Between mass damper?
Yeah. All sites at 3 parts. All 12 buildings have one. How big are they and where are they located?
I'm going to jump back so I can show you that picture. This is the largest one in the world. They might not all look like this. There are 3 forms of tuned mass dampers. This is eliminates, this one actually takes up eight stories for it to hang. So you're eliminating a lot of space at the top of the building to fit this inside the building. So this one itself isn't very common, the pendulum. But there are other forms of the tuned mass damper, basically a big giant concrete block that sits in the building, and whenever the building sways, it basically hits the building to get it back into a state of regularity. You'll generally only find tuned mass dampers in buildings above 60 stories, and only when it's an important building or a building with a very large budget. Otherwise, they would choose other conventional methods.
Thank you.
Any other questions?